As we reached the fateful day of our mission, it was time to bring Luis into the fold. He was our key to entering the construction site unnoticed. That afternoon, we met up with Luis at a nearby coffee shop by the towers. I began to fill him in on everything we had learned from Colonel Wilder. Luis listened intently, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. He agreed to help us, knowing that exposing the horrors lurking within the construction site was the only way to ensure his safety and that of his fellow workers. We parted ways as he headed off to work, and he assured us that he would meet us at the gate and let us in whenever we were ready. From there, we headed to Colonel Wilder's penthouse to finalize our plans. He had obtained a key card that would grant us access to the hidden lab, a crucial piece of the puzzle. But what caught our attention was the large Desert Eagle he had brought along just in case. The Desert Eagle was an imposing weapon known for its immense firepower and size. It was a behemoth of a handgun, easily recognizable by its intimidating appearance. The matte black finish of the weapon gleamed ominously under the dim lights, and its size alone was enough to make anyone think twice about crossing paths with it. Colonel Wilder handled it with the ease of someone well-versed in its use, instilling a sense of confidence in our team. The plan was to head straight for the lab, gather as much evidence as we could, and be gone within half an hour. Armed with the key card and the Desert Eagle, we set off for the construction site under the cover of darkness. As we approached the site, an eerie silence hung in the air. Something indeed seemed off. Luis met us at the main entrance and let us in. He mentioned that he hadn't seen any security personnel all night, a stark deviation from the norm. Moreover, he thought he had heard gunshots earlier, but the sound had been faint and distant, leaving him uncertain. We exchanged nervous glances, aware that the unknown dangers lurking within the construction site were becoming more palpable by the minute. Our mission was now underway, and the horrors we were about to uncover were only a heartbeat away. Luis handed John a walkie-talkie. "Hit me up if anything goes wrong and I'll call the police." With that, we parted ways and headed into the site. I'm not going to lie. At this point, I was terrified, but I fed off the confidence of the colonel and the excitement of Sarah. Without them by my side, I would surely have turned back. As we ventured further into the depths of the construction site, a chilling sensation wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. The odor of the creature lingered in the stale air, growing more pungent with each step towards the stairwell. As we reached the stairwell, we noticed a strange lack of lighting. The lower levels appeared to be suffering from a power outage, plunging them into complete darkness. I took out a flashlight. Its feeble beam struggled to pierce the darkness that enveloped us, casting eerie, shifting shadows in every corner. The very atmosphere seemed to whisper of lurking horrors. The smell intensified as we neared the lab, and what they encountered was perplexing. The lab door was ajar, a highly unusual occurrence in a facility of such high security. Fear churned in my gut as we pushed open the door and entered. Spider goo is present on the floors and walls. "Don't let it touch your skin, it's venomous," Wilder said. "It won't kill you, but it will cause you to be paralyzed and lose consciousness for an hour or so." As we pushed further into the lab, the scene that greeted us was one of utter chaos. Several lifeless bodies of security guards lay strewn near the entrance, their corpses bearing the gruesome marks of spider attacks. Strangely, their weapons were missing, leaving an eerie void in the place where they should have been. Our trio moved further into the lab, and the disarray became more evident. Broken glass and signs of a vicious struggle marred the once pristine stainless steel interior. Spider goo was splattered across surfaces, testifying to the violence that had unfolded there. The foul stench of the creatures permeated every corner. As we ventured deeper into the lab, a grim sight met our eyes. Lifeless scientists lay scattered across the floor, their bodies bearing the grisly marks of the horrific encounter they had suffered. The scene was one of unspeakable carnage. Our gaze was drawn to a large holding pen nearby, and it sent shivers down our spines. The pen's door hung open, a stark contrast to the meticulous security measures that should have been in place. Inside, the room was a scene of chaos, as if a malevolent storm had torn through it. Broken containment units and shredded equipment lay in disarray, and the unmistakable signs of a jailbreak from the spiders were evident. Colonel Wilder's face grew even graver as the realization washed over him. It was clear that the creatures had escaped their confines and wrought havoc in the lab. The magnitude of the threat they faced became painfully apparent. Amidst this macabre scene, we heard a desperate voice calling out for help. It came from one of the back rooms. The steel door showed signs of damage, with dents and streaks of the same viscous substance. The smell of the spiders was overpowering. As we approached the door, it opened slowly, revealing a disheveled figure inside. It was Dr. Robert Crane, a familiar face to Colonel Wilder from their previous work together. Crane's eyes widened with recognition as he saw Wilder, and with trembling hands he pushed the door open to allow them inside. My heart raced and my mind swirled with a cocktail of dread and anticipation as we faced the terrified scientist who had managed to barricade himself away from the horrors that had befallen the lab. The situation had taken a nightmarish turn, and the worst was yet to come. As Dr. Robert Crane recounted the terrifying events that had unfolded in the lab, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier with each word. It had happened just a few hours ago, he explained. The power to the lab had gone out, and during that darkness the escaped spiders struck, releasing the other male spiders from their confinement. Chaos had erupted as they went on a merciless rampage, leaving a trail of death in their wake. Crane had been unable to sound the alarm or call for help without power. He had only barely managed to make it to the west wing of the lab and seal the area off, the spider having clawed up his leg in the process. He had patched himself up but had lost a significant amount of blood and was now limping badly, in no condition to attempt an escape. Crane explained that the females were located in the part of the lab he had barricaded off and were still in containment. Doubtless the other male spiders were planning to free them, driven by their instinct to mate, and nothing could deter them. They were trying to get in not too long ago, Crane said, his voice trembling. I'm not sure where they went now, perhaps forming a plan or an ambush. Initially, they tried to batter down the door but gave up. With a mixture of dread and curiosity, they followed Crane to a back room where the females were kept. There were 5 of them in a single large enclosure. They were terrifying creatures, hissing and screaming as they approached. Crane, however, seemed to derive a sadistic pleasure from taunting them and poking at them with a cattle prod. Enough of that, Crane, Wilder barked. We're not here for revenge. We need to gather evidence and get out. Crane reluctantly handed over hair and blood samples from the spiders and a USB filled with experiment data. We also took several photos of the females as evidence. Wilder then declared, we need to get help. Let's try to contact Luis using the walkie-talkie. However, Luis remained unresponsive on the walkie-talkie, and their cell phones had no reception this deep underground. We realized we would have to fight our way out. As we were about to depart, Crane stopped us. He had saved something from Wilder's time as commanding officer. It was Wilder's old Hellfire M2022 flamethrower, which he had kept in his office in case of spider escapes. The flamethrower, circa 1970, was a formidable and terrifying weapon, designed for maximum destruction. Its fuel tank was limited, but it packed immense power. The Hellfire was discontinued in the 1970s due to its cruelty, but in this case it was exactly what we needed. Crane handed over the flamethrower, and Wilder accepted it with an unsettling grin. He seemed almost giddy at the prospect of unleashing it. However, Crane cautioned Wilder not to use it unless absolutely necessary, as deploying it down here would likely set the entire lab ablaze. Wilder strapped on the flamethrower with a twisted smirk on his face, and then he offered the gun to the group. To our collective surprise, Sarah confidently grabbed it, showing expertise as she checked and prepared the firearm with ease. She handled it with the dexterity of someone well-versed in its use, leaving them impressed. Hey, I'm a country girl at heart, she said, winking at me. I held the flashlight as we prepared to make our way out of the lab, armed with our newfound weapons and a grim determination to escape the horrors that lurked within the construction site. As we began our harrowing escape from the lab, Dr. Robert Crane made the difficult decision to stay behind and try to hold off the male spiders. His leg was too injured to make a swift exit, and he understood the dire consequences if all the females were to escape and start breeding. With that, we exited the barricade and moved cautiously through the dark, spider-infested labyrinth of the basement. My flashlight cast an eerie beam that illuminated only a small portion of the suffocating darkness. The pungent odor of the creatures hung heavily in the air, and the unsettling scuttling noises of the spiders echoed in the distance. We stayed close together, our senses on high alert, fully aware that an attack could come at any moment. Colonel Wilder's voice was a low, ominous whisper. Stay ready, he warned, his flamethrower held firmly in his grasp, a bright blue glow emanating from the tip of the M2's nozzle. The faint smell of gasoline from the fuel tank hung in the air. We entered a long hallway, and upon reaching its midpoint, 2 spiders emerged from each end, their grotesque forms silhouetted by the flashlight. Sarah acted quickly, emptying her clip towards the 2 spiders in front of them and killing one of them. The other scurried around the corner out of sight. Wilder released a brief warning spray of flames with the flamethrower, causing the remaining 2 spiders to retreat, their hissing protests echoing down the corridor. Without hesitation, we sprinted down the hallway towards the lab exit, vaulting over the lifeless body of the spider Sarah had dispatched. Our breaths came fast and heavy as we approached the exit, but just as we entered the stairwell, Wilder abruptly stopped in his tracks. He turned back towards the lab entrance, leveling the hellfire. Confusion and fear gripped me, and I yelled, "What are you doing, Wilder?" "Crane is still inside." Wilder appeared to contemplate for a moment before responding with cold determination. "Sacrifices must be made," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Do you know how many people could die if those spiders got loose in NYC? Do the math, John." He didn't wait for a reply. Instead, he entered the lab again. The sound was a primal, resonant blend of a lion's roar and a jet engine's thrust, loud, overpowering, and irresistibly forceful. The air in the lab instantly turned stifling, almost liquid with heat, making each inhalation feel like a gulp of fire. It was a chaotic symphony of sight and sound, a dance of destruction that left nothing untouched. In mere seconds, the lab was unrecognizable, a blistering hellscape giving testament to the Hellfire M2022's devastating effectiveness. The aggressive blend of napalm and gasoline fuel had made sure the fire clung to everything it touched, a persistent blaze that refused to die down. With a final scan of the charred lab, Wilder released the trigger. The blue pilot flame at the nozzle's tip seemed almost serene now, a quiet epilogue to the furious story it had just written. Finally, Wilder seemed satisfied with his job and turned to leave. As he turned his back, a spider sprang out of the flames. It lunged onto Wilder's back, thrashing violently and biting into his shoulder. In the chaos, Sarah took action, firing the Desert Eagle and blowing off half of the spider's head. The deafening roar of the gun in the confined hallway reverberated through their ears. The creature's lifeless body fell to the floor with a thud. Wilder, injured and slow, scrambled to his feet, and I rushed to support him. Together, we staggered out of the blazing lab and into the smoke-filled hallway. Thick plumes of smoke billowed out behind us as the flames continued to consume everything in their path. As we ascended the stairway, the unmistakable sound of the spider's numerous legs on steel reverberated through the air. It seemed like an army of them were rushing down the stairwell. Thinking quickly, we ducked into sub-basement 4, the second lowest level of the building, which happened to be a parking lot. The power was out here too, plunging us into pitch-black darkness. We listened in dread as the sound of the spider's frenzied descent echoed past our hiding place, disappearing into the depths below. Curiously, the spiders appeared to be going straight into the fire, likely in a last-ditch attempt to save the females before their only chance at mating went up in flames. "We can't risk going back out into the stairwell," Wilder said as we limped further into the dark parking lot. Our footsteps echoed in the massive subterranean expanse, and the flashlight was our only source of light. As we moved deeper into the parking lot, we realized we had to stop. Wilder's condition had worsened. He informed us that he had been stung, which meant he was now subject to the creature's venom. It wouldn't kill him, but it would paralyze him. Soon he wouldn't be able to walk or talk. "Leave me here," Wilder said weakly. "Take the evidence and go." But Sarah had a different idea. She would stay behind with Wilder, armed with the gun to protect him and the crucial evidence they had gathered. John, who knew the building inside and out, would go for help and return for them as quickly as possible. In our search for a safe spot, we found a small alcove in the parking garage, by spot number 487 on sub-level 4. I took note of it and got ready to leave. But before I could, Wilder mustered up one last burst of energy. He removed the Hellfire flamethrower from his back and motioned for me to take it. "How do I use this thing?" I asked nervously. Wilder replied weakly, "You just pray and spray." With that, he slumped back over. Sarah gave me a hug and kissed me on the cheek. "Be careful," she said. I grabbed the flamethrower and strapped on the pack filled with gasoline. I wasn't entirely comfortable with it, but it was much better than being unarmed. I knew a route out that avoided the stairwell. I would ascend through the parking garage as it curled up towards street level. It was a long and treacherous journey in the pitch-dark environment. I had to be quick but also cautious. The garage had already been paved, but construction site debris and random supplies were scattered haphazardly. The glow from the flamethrower's pilot light lit the garage in a dim, eerie light, and I could feel the warmth on my face. As I moved forward, I heard scuttling sounds coming from behind. I quickly ducked behind a skid of supplies. Several spiders rushed by at a terrifying speed. Their scuttling sounded like it was in turbo mode. As they passed, a waft of putrid stench mixed with the smell of burning hair hit me like a punch to the face. I knew I had to keep moving, but I was aware that more spiders could show up or those ahead might lay an ambush. I had to push forward despite my paralyzing fear. At one point, I tripped over some supplies and landed on the ground with a loud crash. I held my breath, waiting for an attack that never came. After a tense minute, all I could hear was silence. Must keep going. Amidst the oppressive darkness, I cautiously navigated the labyrinthine parking garage. The Hellfire's pilot flame cast eerie, flickering shadows that danced on the grimy walls like malevolent spirits. Every step echoed, a solitary sound in the murky void. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I had a sense that something was watching me. Rounding a dim corner, my fears materialized into a grotesque form. A large spider lay in ambush about 10 meters away. Its yellow eyes were staring directly into mine. It moved cautiously at first, its eyes reflecting the tiny blue flame from my weapon. Then, with an otherworldly screech, it charged, its fangs glistening. A surge of terror flooded through me, freezing me in place for a split second. But I snapped back, remembering the devastation Wilder had unleashed with the M2 just moments ago. Offering a quick silent prayer, I tightened my grip on the Hellfire's trigger. With a guttural roar, a torrent of fire erupted from the nozzle, an unyielding wave of heat and destruction. The proprietary napalm gasoline mix propelled itself from the tank, superheated and aggressive, reaching out like the hand of Hades. Several crates in its path burst into flames almost instantly, the wood popping and crackling, consumed by the hungry inferno. Black smoke billowed upward, merging with the room's existing murkiness. The creature dodged with unsettling agility, but not entirely. Flames licked its outer limbs, charring its bristly hide and eliciting a tortured hiss. Its advance was halted. Now it was on the defensive, dodging and jumping around with fighting quickness. Emboldened, I advanced, sending sustained arcs of flame sweeping across the concrete. The creature evaded the main brunt of each fiery burst, but clearly suffered from singeing and sizzling contact with the weapon's outer fringes. Retreating in evident pain, it seemed to slow down. I followed the glow of its singed body as it disappeared into a gaping crack in the wall. I cautiously approached and peered inside. A nest, teeming with the activity of equally grotesque arachnids. The smell was nauseating, an overpowering stench of decay and venom. Stepping back, I felt a dark pleasure creep into my heart. Payback time, I muttered. I unleashed the Hellfire onto the nest, and instantly the crack became a fiery maw. A cacophony of shrill wails erupted, nearly drowning out the sound of the roaring flames. Then, in a burst of fire and smoke, countless burning spiders erupted from the hole, their bodies aflame, cascading like falling stars from a hellish sky. I stepped back, watching the nightmarish creatures scuttle frenetically before succumbing to the inferno I'd unleashed. As the last wail died out, replaced by the crackling of dying embers, I felt both horror and satisfaction. The dark parking garage seemed a bit less oppressive, and the weight of the Hellfire M2022 felt a little lighter on my shoulder. Not much fuel left. But the experience, the crossing of some ethical threshold, would stay with me forever. Just as I began to relax, I heard the dreaded scuttling coming from behind. My heart pounds like a drum as I spot more of them, reinforcements, bigger and angrier, emerging from the dark corners of this godforsaken garage. A glance at my Hellfire's fuel gauge confirms my worst fear. I'm almost out. I turn and bolt for the stairwell, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the cavernous space. Behind me, the sound of skittering legs crescendos into a nightmarish symphony. I make my way past the stairwell door and spin around. I aim the nozzle of the flamethrower at the entrance and pull the trigger one last time. With a final roar, the Hellfire spits out its remaining fuel, transforming the doorway into a wall of flame. The inferno roars and crackles, and for a moment I feel a sense of triumph. But the Hellfire goes silent. Its tank is now empty. With a sense of regret, I unstrap the Hellfire and leave it by the flaming doorway. Turning, I rushed up the steps, taking them two at a time. Then I hear it, a shriek so high-pitched and furious that it chills my blood. I glance over my shoulder just in time to see one of those abominations break through the burning doorway, its body alight but seemingly unhindered by the flames. It's a behemoth of a spider, almost twice the size of the others. It's scuttling up the stairs behind me, closing the gap with terrifying speed. And now I'm unarmed, fueled only by adrenaline and the dreadful realization that I'm not the hunter anymore. I'm the prey. Reaching ground level, I darted out into the main construction site, desperation fueling my escape. I pushed over a large scaffold which landed on the creature, but it burst out from under the debris with an otherworldly determination. Its body is still glowing and singed from the flames. It climbed up on the steel structure of the tower and began to pursue me from above. In the distance, I spotted Glenn's portable office, where meetings with architects and engineers took place. With aching muscles and adrenaline coursing through my veins, I headed for it. It was my only chance now. I climbed the small wooden staircase to the portable's entrance, my breath ragged and the sound of the pursuing spider growing nearer. Just as I heaved the door open, the spider flung itself downward, airborne, its claws reaching out for me. I dodged, jumping for the door and ducking down, but as I did this, the spider adjusted. Two of its hairy clawed arms trace a gouge across my back. I quickly got up and hauled myself inside. The door slammed shut and the spider collided with it, hissing and screaming. It threw itself against the door with all its weight, each thud echoing my frantic heartbeat. I sat with my back to the door, blood soaking through my clothes. I reached back to feel the gooey wound. I had been stung. With my last ounce of energy, I pulled out my phone and thanked whatever powers that be for the full reception. I dialed emergency, gasping out my location before succumbing to the encroaching paralysis and losing consciousness as the sirens wailed in the distance. I woke up in the back of the ambulance, feeling groggy and disoriented. I had been patched up and given some painkillers. As my senses slowly returned, I stumbled to my feet, swaying like a drunk, and pushed open the ambulance door. What I saw outside left me breathless, a towering inferno. The construction site was ablaze with a chaotic frenzy of emergency crews battling the raging fire. Panicking, I fumbled for my phone and tried to call Sarah and then Colonel Wilder, but both calls went straight to voicemail. Turning to a paramedic, I urgently asked about other survivors. The paramedic pointed to another ambulance nearby. Inside was a badly injured man. It was Luis. He looked battered and disoriented. Luis recounted his harrowing experience, recounting how he had stood guard on the ground floor, only to be relentlessly pursued by one of the creatures. Desperate to escape, he had ascended the tower but had been cornered on the 4th floor and forced to leap out of a window to evade the relentless predator. He had suffered injuries, including fractured ankles and a severe concussion, but he miraculously survived. As the towering inferno continued to rage, fear and dread consumed me. Unanswered questions swirled through my mind. How many creatures were on the loose? Had the females been released, or had they perished in the engulfing flames? What had become of Sarah and Colonel Wilder? It made me sick to think they had been consumed in the inferno. With no answers in sight, my life descended into uncertainty. Glenn, the project manager, contacted me the following day, explaining that the project would be put on hold indefinitely, and all the workers would receive their paychecks as we awaited further instructions. I contemplated returning to Los Angeles, leaving this nightmarish ordeal behind, but I couldn't abandon the hope of finding Sarah. I needed answers, and I needed to know what had happened to her. There was a story about the fire in the paper the next day. The article claimed there were no deaths. I knew this had to be false. I had seen the bodies of the security guards with my own eyes, not to mention Dr. Crane, who had surely succumbed to the blaze. On the other hand, it gave me hope that Sarah and Wilder had in fact survived. Over the next week, I called Sarah repeatedly. Each call met with the haunting sound of her voicemail. I visited her apartment, but there was no response at the door. I even approached some of her neighbors who claimed there had been no sign of her recently. Trapped in a limbo of despair, I once again grappled with solitude and fear as the memories of the events at the construction site continued to haunt me. Night after night, I lay in bed, tormented by the echoing, scuttling sounds I thought I heard on the fire escape. My once placid cat Violet had transformed into an agitated and aggressive guardian, prowling by the balcony doors as if sensing an unseen threat. My life has become a living nightmare, marked by uncertainty and fear. Desperate for answers, I am reaching out to the online community for help. I'm hoping that someone might have information about Sarah or Colonel A. Wilder. If anyone knows of any information, please DM me. I'm offering a reward for any information that leads me to find either one, dead or alive. I need closure. If I can, I will continue to post updates. Thank you for listening. John Strafe.